finally we get to talk about jazz. I'm in chapter 56, and this is a really fun chapter for me. We're going to actually talk about the jazz artists, but I'd like to include Gershwin and William Grant Still in that as well. Although they're a little bit different, they are more in line with the classical genre of music, but they incorporate American jazz sounds into their music. So we'll be talking about those guys as well, but we're going to start out right here in chapter 56 and talk about the root of jazz and kind of how it came to be. Jazz really comes out of a number of different elements. Most of it comes from the African American community. When you think about work songs, when they worked in the field, either as slaves or as free men, and white people too, when we worked in the fields, most of the time you had something called work songs, where it's, when you sing together, it actually makes the day go by faster and the work seem a little bit easier. With that comes the advent of blues, which it's not really a part of jazz. It's actually a little bit different style than jazz is, but it comes from the same sort of root elements, and blues actually comes out of what we call singing the blues and having blue notes, having notes that sound flattened or sound a little bit different because you're singing usually about something negative. Blues are usually not a happy topic, but this comes directly out of the South as well. And by the time we get to Scott Joplin at the turn of the century, we have some of these syncopated rhythms, and they are coming more into play with this. And then Louis Armstrong, who was out of New Orleans, really kind of brought the style. He was one of the first ones that had his own band, his own group. There were, several going on in New Orleans, but Louis Armstrong started to tour all over the country, and he actually went up to Chicago and made quite a name for himself up in Chicago, which is another reason we have like a Chicago style blues. But basically, jazz is a fully American invention, which is really cool. So it comes out of the context of work songs, of spirituals, of blues, and a lot of it kind of got its foothold down in New Orleans at the time. Our first notable singer is Billie Holiday. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time listening to her music. It's there, you can hear it. The other thing I wanted to point out in your external links folders, this is Unit 7. I put up a piece, two more pieces, a Billie Holiday piece and another Duke Ellington piece that's quite famous. I thought you all might like to hear a little more of their music, so that's there for you if you'd like to check that out. Billie Holiday, as famous as she was, could not overcome, there's a picture of her, Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong. And she couldn't overcome drug addiction and kind of bad choices in relationships and things like that. So she was constantly trying to overcome these problems, and it ended up getting the best of her. Actually, probably a lot like a modern day Whitney Houston. The same sort of idea with her, but her voice is absolutely exceptional and beautiful. And I strongly encourage you guys to listen to her music. The other artist that's featured in this chapter is Duke Ellington, and I do want to take a look at his particular style because it's what we call big band, where we have a larger group. Let's see if this picture, yeah, you can see a little part of the big band there behind him, but he was the band leader. He came up with a lot of the tunes himself. He actually wrote a lot of these and wrote the orchestration and everything for them. And this was a larger group. You've got saxophones, you're going to have clarinets, you're going to have trumpets, trombones, rhythm section. Here he's playing on the piano, and you're going to have a singer out front. This particular number doesn't have any vocals with it, but that would be kind of the configuration of a big band. One other thing to mention, the book talks about what happens after this point, and I have for the listening, the feature video of the week, Dave Brubeck. And, wait, no, I don't. I have Stan Getz. But they all kind of go along in the same field, same idea. Dave Brubeck, another really great jazz artist from the 50s and 60s. I chose Stan Getz because I thought we would feature the saxophone since it's so great in jazz. But this particular page gives you a little bit more, page 326, gives you a little bit more of a futuristic approach to jazz and what happens kind of after this point. So you might want to take a look at that as well. But let's listen. I would imagine you've heard Take the A Train before. It's one of the most popular songs ever. Now, one of the interesting features of this particular song is this moving bass line. We call it a walking bass line, and you're going to hear that strumming of the bass, upright bass, you know, the large looking violin. You're gonna hear that throughout the piece. And we have a number of choruses. You can see we have A's and B's along with the interlude. So it's fairly simple, but listen to the hits that come in the back behind the melody. What they're saying here, the syncopated accents with the trumpets and trombones. And that's a kind of a hallmark feature of big band also, is you're going to have a melody, and then you're going to have some sort of accompaniment that's going to be syncopated and jazz-like feel to it. So let's listen to a little bit more. Now, this particular piece of music is really fun. My kids love to listen to it. It's got a lot of wide appeal to a lot of different audiences. So take a listen to the whole thing. It's really quite nice. I'm going to move on to chapter 58 and talk about Gershwin, and then go back and talk about William Grant Still, because Gershwin's a little bit closer to jazz than William Grant Still is. So cultivated jazz, George Gershwin was known as something called a song plugger. He and his brother George wrote the music, and his brother Ira wrote a lot of lyrics for popular songs at the time, and they did have commercial success doing it. But that really wasn't enough for Gershwin. And what Gershwin did is he actually teamed up with another guy named Paul Whiteman, who had orchestras that were franchised, that went all over the country. And he worked to actually bring jazz to an orchestra setting. So we play a number of his pieces today that are in an orchestral setting. And so he was really kind of the first one that did this. This song that's featured in the text is from a opera, or, you know, it's not really, you can't really call it civic light opera. You really have to call it more just like a more formal opera. But Porgy and Bess is an American story, and there's a lot of tunes from Porgy and Bess that you might recognize. The Summertime song is actually what your Inquisitive is on for this particular unit, because I wanted to take you out of classical music and bring a more jazz and popular influence into what we're studying, because you guys have been so, you know, immersed in classical music. So I'm having you do it on Porgy and Bess this time. And the music is really nice to listen to. It really depicts a summertime evening. And you can hear that. You can hear how slow it is. And then we have this two-note motive. There's two notes that are repeated over and over again. To me, that just sounds like a rocker on a porch in the summertime in the South. So let's take a quick listen. Right there. And then it's going to be reiterated here in the bells. as you can hear, this is quite different than anything that we have worked on in the past as far as Inquisitives go. But it's a song that you may have been familiar with. Janis Joplin sang it in the 1960s, and it really kind of put a popular spin on the song. I have another piece I want you to listen to the beginning of, because Gershwin was, like I said, was really known for bringing jazz to the classical orchestra. So I'll do the opening of An American in Paris, which is a tone poem, a song for an orchestra that he made up after he went and visited in Paris. And I wanted to show you too, here's the recording I'm going to be featuring, but there are a number of recordings here, including one of the Summertime, the song Summertime, but it was recorded by Ella Fitzgerald, who to me is kind of the quintessential performer of this particular song. So check that out too, because she is amazing, amazing, amazing. And she sings a lot of Gershwin's tunes, and she's really well known for singing Gershwin's tunes as a jazz singer. So check that out. Well, let's listen to the very beginning of American in Paris. This is actually the LA fill, and you can listen and hear the jazz influence, but this is a strictly classical orchestra. That's the horns that you would hear on a car in Paris in 1928. So it's, you know, it's kind of quirky, it's fun, and it does have those jazz overtones associated with it. And this was a classical piece with jazz influences that was written by Gershwin. And finally, we have William Grant Still, who is our first African-American composer who was really taken seriously beyond Scott Joplin. Scott Joplin was taken serious posthumously many years after his death as a serious composer. Of course, he did quite well with piano rolls and ragtime and early jazz influence. But William Grant Still kind of was deeply involved in this Harlem Renaissance. It was a way for Black people to highlight their contributions to the actual country's what we call cultural heritage, where it's not just a bunch of white guys getting together making music as that being the only important classical influence, but he kind of uses a lot of jazz and blues influence to create classical music, just like Gershwin did. So you're going to hear that in his music. I wanted to show you actually right away this walking bass line, just like we heard in Take the A Train just a moment ago. There's also something in here called stride that is kind of an offbeat, and I'm going to show you what that is too, that comes directly out of jazz and ragtime also. But let's take a listen to the beginning here. Here's that walking bass line. There's the melody, and there, this middle row is called the stride. Does sound very blues oriented here. Now the piano is going to play by itself. Here he has the melody. We have a little bit of action in the violin, mostly piano. There we go. There comes the violin back. This is a nice piece by William Grant Still. He has many others that he's well recognized for as well.